And as people are joining us, I would like to introduce our moderator, Yati Waghray, who I am pleased to say is on our board of directors here at DESCA. Yati is a senior chemical engineer. He's been in global business development all his career, and he really understands bringing new technologies, new products to market. So he's going to moderate this discussion about, so I have a new technology, I have a new product, I'd like to start my own business. What does it really take? And I'm coming out of a college and university. So Yati, over to you.
Thank you, Dora. Can you hear me? Can you hear me well?
Yep, we can hear you.
So just wanted to thank everybody for taking the time to join this this panel discussion. I think we have a great panel, a very diverse group of panel, but very relevant to the topic. And the panel has been, the experience has been across venture capital, early stage investors. People in this panel have done startups of their own, and and some of them have worked with strategics. So an exceptionally diverse panel, very relevant to the topic we're going to talk about. Let me take a quick, I also want to remind the folks who are the attendees on the call, really, we're going to run this panel discussion for about 45 minutes. And towards the end of this discussion, we're going to have open questions from the attendees. So feel free to go and type in your questions, and we'll field them towards the end of the discussion. I just want to make sure you start typing, because if you wait till the 45 minutes are over, then it will take a little bit of a lag to get the questions in. I'm going to just quickly go through a little bit of an introduction to our great panel here. Jeff Fetterman. Jeff is an entrepreneur and an expert in pharmaceutical risk management. He has supported early stage enterprises, and he has mentored some of the folks. He has worked in the areas of mentoring of startups, strategy, and leadership. And he's currently acting CEO of SBS Food Group, which is commercializing an all-natural, healthy, low-calorie sweetener. That's Jeff, I think, with great experience and background. And then I have Kasper. He is a partner and founder of Blue Collective, which is an early stage investor and a venture capital company. JJ is based out of New York. Yeah, he supports startups, investors, and corporations on topics kind of ranging from investments, M&A, diligence, to strategic planning, to operational improvement. So got a very diverse experience. And prior to founding Blue Collective, JJ has worked as a senior advisor at McKinsey & Company. So he's got a very diverse background too, and coming in from a little different geography would also bring in a different perspective. Then I have Santiago, who's the CTO at W7 Energy, which is a startup based out of Wilmington. So he's our fellow here in Wilmington. He is a PhD in chemical engineering. What W7 Energy is doing is they are developing fuel cell technology, and have recently focused on building an entire hydrogen electrolyzer unit. And Santiago, feel free to correct me if I'm stating something wrong here. He has a lot of experience working on getting grants. He has worked with NSF, and he can be a good insight, a good mentor, and can provide good insights in a startup. What are the troubles? He has got some bruises on his body being a startup himself. And W7 has also, has worked closely with DESCA in some of our workshops. So he can, we have worked together on with W7. Then I've got Franchessa, who is also out of Wilmington. She's the CEO of Thrupore Technologies, which is a startup, as I said, based out of Wilmington. She has a PhD in analytical chemistry. Thrupore is an innovative materials company, and I think, if I'm not wrong, was spun off from the University of Alabama in 2013. And we're glad that she's in Wilmington now. Thrupore's first product, if I'm not wrong, was a high-value specialty material, highly porous carbon support structure for industrial catalysts. Franchessa has been successfully able to raise seed capital and grants from NSF, and she has also participated in NSF ICOPS program. So she can, if anybody has any questions about the ICOPS program, both Santiago and Franchessa for sure can share their experiences around it. And last but not the least, I've got and Graeme Cruickshank. I'm sorry if I'm messing up your name. He's based out of UK, so he's coming in from a whole different set of experiences out of UK. He's a CTO, or Chief Technology Officer at CPI. CPI is a UK-based technology innovation center, which helps companies adopt and prosper from new technologies and knowledge. So he's got his passion, if I'm not wrong, is developing creative solutions to challenging technical and business problems. Has a wealth of knowledge and experience working with mentoring and working with people who are innovators, startups. And prior to his current role, he was with P&G, leading a global technical organization which was responsible for driving collaborative innovation with partners. So I think he can bring in a whole different perspective to this discussion and this group. So just a quick sharing of who's on the panel. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to start off with asking a few set of questions, and we'll start those questions and run through the panel to get their feedback. And again, the whole idea of this panel discussion is to understand what it takes for somebody to go from a research to a business. What does the entrepreneurial route look like? What kind of skills are needed to be an entrepreneur? What is the market looking for? How do the strategics function? What are the investors, the venture capitalists looking for from a startup? So I think this panel has got both a diversity of people who are into startup mode themselves, who have learned the process, have gone through some of these initial learnings and have been successful. And some of them who are on the other side, who are the investors and have worked with startups in terms of investing money in them, as well as being a mentor to these startups. So they can provide a very different perspective to you. And there are some who have worked in strategics like P&G and myself in companies like DuPont and Kraton. So we bring in a little bit of a different perspective. So I think good panel. So I'm just going to pause for a minute. Does anybody on the panel or Dora want to add anything before we start shooting off to the questions? Great, we're good to go. So again, please, just again, a reminder, don't hesitate to type in your questions in the Q&A box so that we can start compiling them and address them to the end of the call, end of the discussion. So I'm going to start off with a few questions here. The first question I have in my mind is, there is a different personality and a mindset needed to be an entrepreneur. So to the panel here, what kind of personality or mindset do you think is needed to be an entrepreneur, especially in the space of science? And a second part to that question is, what is needed to manage your emotional side? Because this is going to be a roller coaster ride. So what is your thought process? What do you advise? What is needed from an emotional side? So I'm going to start off with Jeff, putting you on a spot there, Jeff, but I'm going to start off with Jeff, and then we'll go through the round, okay? So Jeff, off to you.
Well, my first thought is that I personally prefer to think about it more as a mindset than as a personality, because I don't think that just because someone is more introverted, let's say, that they're more or less able to be successful as an entrepreneur, or if they tend to be more extroverted, it's not necessarily a success criteria. But what I do think is really essential is a couple of things. One is to have a beginner's mind, not to assume that you have all the right answers. Even though you may be an expert in your field, you may not have the answers from the customer perspective. And that's the second important thing, is to recognize that even though you love your technology, you love your product, you love what it's doing, and you need to love it because you need to be passionate about it, because that passion comes across as you're talking with your prospective customers. You also need to be objective about it and understand that what really matters isn't whether it technically performs, it's whether it performs in the viewpoint of the customer, of the potential buyer. And so being able to position it, communicate it, and make sure that it is actually solving a need of a potential customer is important. So all of that, getting back to what's your mindset is to have one of a beginner, to be able to go and constantly be asking questions about what the customer is actually seeking. And secondly, to be objective, to be able to control your own real passion for this thing that you care about while you are pursuing it in an objective way from the standpoint of your customer. Those would be the first two things that come to mind for me.
Hey, Jeff, just curious, anything on how a person should have a mindset around the emotional side?
Well, certainly,
roller coaster ride.
Yeah, the comment that's often made at various stages of or at various points of an early stage entrepreneurial business is, how do you sleep at night? You have so much going on, so many unfinished things, so many things that are uncertain. How can you go to sleep at night? And so from an emotional standpoint, you certainly need to be able to commit yourself in a very stepwise fashion to getting those open-ended things done, while at the same time not taking them on in such a way as feeling like your personal success as an individual hangs on each one of those things in your to-do list. Otherwise, it will not be something that you can tolerate.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm going to move to somebody who has had some bruises. Franchessa, you have run through the startup mode and you have learned a few things now. We'd love to hear your thoughts and any further comments you want to add to what Jeff mentioned.
Yeah, so I'd say, like, one of the main personality traits that I see between myself and other entrepreneurs versus people that have jobs in industry is risk adverse. So if you are not risk adverse, this is not, or if you are risk adverse, this is not the field for you. You know, anytime I mention just one of the predicaments that, you know, we have Thrupore has on a day-to-day basis to my husband, he nearly has a heart attack, and he just, so we don't talk about that too much. But yeah, I would say, you know, if you need that security, you know, to go to sleep every night, entrepreneurism is really just not for you. The other thing I would say is coachability. So, you know, identifying, kind of to what Jeff was saying, that you don't know everything by any means. There's no way you could. And being able to listen to feedback and take that, and then whether it is craft your product or your technology or even yourself personally, to, you know, portray the you know, whatever it is that you need to your customers or venture capitalists or, you know, investors or whatever it is, so that you can really portray what you need to do, you know, in order to, you know, achieve goals.
Thanks, Franchessa. And again, you know, I think the point which you bring up is, even though we take it lightly about your husband, and it's important to have clarity of, you know, because you're dealing, you know, if you have a family, then you make sure your other significant partner is aware of some of this roller coaster ride you're going to go through, because they're going to be part of your ride too, directly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Thanks, Franchessa. And And I'm going to move to JJ real quick. JJ, you're coming from a very different point of view, right? You've been working with companies, I'm assuming when you were with McKinsey as a management consultant, so from a strategic point of view, but then you have been an investor in startups. What would you advise people who are startups on this particular area of personality and mindset and emotional? How do they manage their emotional sides?
Yeah, well, I thought both the comments before were great. Yeah, and I've worked in the corporate world. I've run my own businesses. I'm now an investor, and this is a company I started, so I had entrepreneurial journey on this one and still do. I was previously a lawyer. I was also in academics for a long time too, so I've got a bunch of different random experiences. But yeah, I think it's I think it's the previous answer in large part. There's a risk piece to this that I always find it a little bit hard to define, and it's a bit of you either have it or you don't. And there's some element too that for a lot of folks that doesn't really get tested in the corporate world or in the academics world. And so sometimes you have to go and try entrepreneurship to see if you like it. But I would say the reality is it's a DNA makeup that most people don't have, and you kind of have to go and do it and see if you do. And you either like it or you don't like it. And I guess my take's always been like when I was in the corporate world, even at the most stressful jobs, I kind of felt like, and actually when I was in academics too, I always thought about my life as, if maybe it was for a particular job, I had four parts bad stuff and 6 parts good stuff, and you were always kind of thinking about how do I make it like 7 parts good and 3 parts bad. It was always about minimizing the bad, whatever that meant, right? And late nights or bad bosses or so on and so forth. And with entrepreneurship, I would say if you're doing it right, it's going to be like 1 part good, 9 parts bad always. And you either like that or you don't like that. There's some element of you have to be self-flagellation involved with entrepreneurship. And what I mean by that is it again is what Franchessa was saying is like every day basically everything goes wrong all the time, and so it's actually your job to sort of like figure out the solution. Okay, what do we do next, and this and that. And you do have successes, but when you look at them objectively as the entrepreneur, you're like, oh, that's such a small success relative to my vision. But then you have to turn around to the team and say, that was enormous. Way to go, guys. We're still going forward. So it's a really weird, and like I said, you either like it or you don't like it. It either comes across and it's super authentic or it's not. And I don't know, ex ante, like looking in, I don't know how you really judge whether a person's got it or they don't until they kind of put themselves in those situations and see how they deal with this type of, and like I say, I've never been able to articulate correctly. It's a stress, it's an anxiety that is different than the anxiety in a regular job because it's an anxiety related to like risk. If stuff goes wrong, and that it's never as bad as, but if stuff goes wrong, you're going to lose all your money and you're going to feel like you've wasted 3 years in a fundamentally different way than if you had a bad job for 3 years. It's never that bad too, just to be clear, but there is an element like you that's in the back of your mind.
Great insights, JJ, for sure. Absolutely. Thank you very much. Santiago, I know you've gone through yourself a similar experience like some of you guys here. Any quick additions you have to what the rest of the folks have said?
I think it's very much in line. I think the way I look at it is you need to have persistency, you need to be humble to accept the feedback that you get. And another third one is to be able to embrace uncertainty. In a startup, you never know what's going to happen next. You never know what direction is even the market going to take you or the technology going to take you. So I think that from the get-go, you need to be very much open to embrace uncertainty and roll with it. So I think that's a very important characteristic as an entrepreneur. And then with regards to the emotional side, I think is the risk assessment. So a good way that I look at it is how much am I willing to spend? How much am I willing to lose in return for what I'm currently doing? And then constantly referring to that, because this one is definitely a roller coaster. Sometimes things go great, sometimes things don't go as well as you expect. And as JJ was saying, like you really want to know how much are you willing to give out in return for the startup that you're doing. So definitely keeping that in the back of your head. So you're putting all the effort, but then you're putting all the effort with knowledge in mind of what are you giving up in return for that.
No, absolutely, Santiago, and thank you. Graeme, any additions to any?
It's really hard to add on that, because I think the guys have covered the spectrum really well. Although I mean, interestingly, I had scribbled down here passion and an ability to communicate it in a compelling way. So I'm not talking about whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. I'm just saying when you communicate what you're doing, you are compelling and clear, and you get people buying in no matter what. Resilience is obvious because of the need to handle risk. I, like Santiago, had written down humble, but I was connecting it to Franchessa's coachability. Because my definition of humble here is recognize that others know stuff you don't know. And it's not always about your molecule or your piece of science. Therefore, be really keen to learn from others what they're teaching you. But my build on it further down here was, but how much of that is about coaching me, i.e. it's all about you, versus the team? Because where I've seen the most successful startups, it has been something of a dynamic team. There's always one core entrepreneur, lead, anchor point, if you like. I get it. And they may say they're the core entrepreneur. But the ones who've thrived have known when to bring other people around them and when to let some of those people go to other things and bring in different people around them. That's part of your how do you constantly learn and bring new insights. But the ones I've seen successful have also brought resilience in that. You were talking about emotions and risk and fear and how do you manage that. Sometimes I saw people use the team around them to absorb some of that fear, if you like, to allow them to be successful. So there's an element of how much was you and how much is the team you develop. That's maybe my only build on what other people have said so far, Yati.
No, great points, Graeme. And I think, anybody who's planning to be an entrepreneur, it's such an important thing to have the right personality and the mindset, because it is a roller coaster ride for sure. And something which you mentioned is don't fall in love with the product, Graeme. I think that leads to the next question. Being a technologist, I have experienced myself when I work with my technology organization, they love their technology. So one thing I have is, don't fall in love with your product or technology. I think it's how important is that? How important is this for a technology-based innovator, entrepreneur to be successful? Love to hear. I want to start that off with Franchessa. Based on your efforts with various improved catalyst performance and so on. You work with your own technology and you're working with the customers. Your thoughts around this particular question of don't fall in love with your technology or product.
Well, so for me, throughout the years, I've actually learned so much more about what our technology can do just by being flexible to pivot, right? So we started out with a very specific product that we were going to use for a very specific reaction. And we, went out into the marketplace and we found out that nobody cared, So, but, so you think that you have a specific product and then it turns out, yeah, not really. So you really have to understand at a different level what you do, and what you're actually selling. So, can you take your product or your technology and tweak it a bit to fit the problem that you learn about, So you're going out there and people are like, yeah, I'm not really going to do that, but I have this issue over here. If you could solve this, that would be great, So you look into it and you're like, yeah, I could do that. Yeah, we could do that. And then you try to figure out, is there a low cost, quick and dirty experiment that just kind of proves that it's feasible, And yeah, that's how we've actually tackled a lot of our customers and a lot of our industry is finding out new problems. And then, you start going down the rabbit hole, you find out that, oh my goodness, this is a huge problem. And, it's completely different than what you started out with. So.
No, absolutely. I think great points, Franchessa. And also, I think it's important. It's not about your product and technology. It's about what the customer is looking for and what their problem is and how your technology, how your product is going to solve their problem. If it doesn't solve the problem, your product or technology might not be that valuable to the customer. So it's important to understand that. So I'm going to move to Graeme. Graeme, you come up with a little bit of a different experience having with P&G, and I'm just curious about your thought around, don't fall in love with technology or product.
Yeah, it sounds slightly two-faced when I say this, because what I'm saying, be super passionate about it, but just don't be so in love with it that you're not willing to change, right?
Yeah.
So you have to have that balance, but you have to be enthusiastic and passionate and driven, but don't be so blinded that you wouldn't say, actually, but I might need to change something. Because as Franchessa's already said, technology push rarely wins. It has to be solution pull.
Yeah.
There's the marriage of what's needed with what's possible. I need this, or no, this is possible. Yeah, I know, but does anyone need it? And then when you work in a sort of P&G type land, it's I need this. But when you listen to that problem, it's, hang on, you want me to cure cancer by Tuesday and you want it for free. That's often the barrier when you're engaging with the big guys, right? And the sweet spot is that bit in the middle of it is needed and it is possible, so you can see how to go forward. But I guess the one mindset that people need to remember that when they're dealing with I'm not decrying Procter or whatever. I mean, I had a wonderful career there, but there's a truth that isn't obvious to people in the outside world. Just because your product is a bit better than what I do today is not a reason for me to change and embrace your product. Just because your product is a little bit cheaper than what I do today is not a reason for me to change from what I'm doing today to use your product. Because anytime I change something, think of yourself as the customer, the end user. Anytime I change something, I'm taking a risk. It might not work. Something unexpected might happen. I'm taking a risk. There's an old line, nobody ever got fired for not changing stuff, right? So there's a huge barrier, inertia barrier you have to overcome when you're trying to sell your idea or your technology in where there is an incumbent solution today. So if I already know how to do something today, I already have a product today, you coming with a slightly better version or a slightly cheaper version is of no interest to me at all. None at all. Couldn't care less, because all you're doing is making me take risks that might get me fired. Not doing it. You come with something which is 10 times cheaper, okay, I want to talk to you now. But even then, you're kind of slightly over a barrel because I've already got a market value for that solution in my head because I know what I pay today. So I'm already in a negotiation with you trying to drive down that cost. So one of the things that's most attractive is coming along with a solution to a problem that wasn't being addressed before. That was part of Franchessa's point, actually, was it is a genuine problem today. I don't have a solution to it. Now you're innovating in the right space, because now you're innovating a space where people care and you don't have a bank of competitors lined up with you. You are providing something new and useful. Therefore, people will lean in and want to engage with you in that space. But that maybe wasn't the idea you came to them with in the first place. So love your area of science, love your technology. That's great, but don't be so wedded to your one solution that that's all you tell them about. You need green widgets. You need green widgets. I don't need green widgets, but I wouldn't mind a blue one. Oh, funnily enough, I can make blue ones if I take out the yellow bit. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think it's all about creating value. No, thank you, Graeme. Jeff, any additions to the points raised by Franchessa and Graeme, and anything else you want to add to that?
I would tell a story, and because I think that what Graeme and Franchessa said hit all the points very well. What I would do is just tell a story, which is my own story, that sort of illustrates this. And that is, I was working for a large pharmaceutical company. And in the marketing of a pharmaceutical product, my team discovered that by focusing on the risks, which sounds completely counterintuitive, but by focusing on the risks of the medication and helping the patients and the physicians to understand how to manage those risks, that they could indeed be more proficient and more comfortable using those medications. So it's a bit of a counterintuitive, and it was enormously successful for medications that were potentially risky. So it seemed like almost a no-brainer for me to say, well, as an independent business, I could co-found a business whereby we go and help other risky medications take on this problem. And indeed, the method would work, but it doesn't matter that it demonstrated to work once. It didn't matter that I was convinced that it would work. What really mattered was whether in other companies and other cultures, whether they could embrace this as an idea of how to market their own medications. And so the term that was brought up earlier, the humility to go into somebody else's organization and to say, for you and your organization, what are the challenges you're trying to work on? As Graeme mentioned earlier, everybody wants that thing fixed with very little money, but if you can help to explore those possibilities with what you've got to offer and have already demonstrated to be effective, well, now there's an opportunity there. But the prideful idea of coming in and saying, well, I've done this once and I can do it for you and it's going to work, that doesn't, you can bring a lot of passion behind that, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to sell a lot of that. So you've got to be open to meeting them in the middle.
Oh, great points, Jeff. Great points. Thank you, Jeff. Santiago, anything from your experiences with 777? You know, I'm sure you have gone through some of these issues where you had to change things as you started to learn more and more from the market.
Yeah, something that I see as an issue is like the idea of perfectionism, and that's kind of like the way I match it with the falling in love with your product. Sometimes you have an idea on what you see that the ideal product would look like, and you definitely have the picture in your mind, and that's definitely where you want to go. But really is where that humility comes into play. You go talk with your customers, see what are really features that maybe are super important for you in your mental picture, but really are not important for the customers. Maybe are things that you need to add that you haven't even considered. So it's really like getting away from that, okay, I don't have the perfect picture in my head. Let's go and explore what the customers, what the people, even people that are not your customers may give you some pretty good ideas that may make your product really marketable.
Oh, good point, Santiago. Anything, JJ, anything on closing? Do you have anything else to add to this?
I was just trying to think of something kind of relevant to I think many of the folks, attendees are, you know, researchers or in school and doctorate stuff. You know, there is and I'm overstating here, but having worked with a few folks who've gone from academics to entrepreneurship, it's a tough transition to entrepreneur, regardless of where you're coming from, I should say up front. And so it's sort of unique challenges, whatever are your priors coming into entrepreneurship get challenged and you get deprogrammed and all sorts of stuff from whether you're coming from corporate world, anything else. But for researchers in particular, you know, one thing to think about is, and again, here's where I'm overstating, but your job when you're doing science, so to speak, is you've got a bunch of experiments and you are, with anything you're doing work on, you're effectively trying to disprove the null hypothesis, right? You have hypotheses up front, you're trying to disprove the null hypothesis, and that might take you years to do. In entrepreneurship, even if your product is something of a material nature, the minute that you get a hint, maybe that's how I put it, once you've got enough facts, once you can make the inference that the null hypothesis is to be rejected, you get away from it, you move. You go to the next hypothesis. And that can be really hard for researchers, for business people too often. I see that also with a lot of lawyers get stuck on this. So hypothesis driven is a real strength for folks coming from where you are, because that's actually a unique skill set to be able to form hypotheses and then think about experiments. That's a core skill set, I think, for any entrepreneur. But where people get stuck sometimes coming from academia is not giving up the hypothesis. You have to be willing, if on day one you have a hypothesis and day two, the initial customer focus group or whatever, the initial test suggests your hypothesis is wrong, day two, you throw it out. You restart, okay, here's the new hypothesis, try again. And that can be very hard for folks who think about their job as a very long and persistent search for the truth, you know, disproving that null hypothesis. That's not what entrepreneurship is about.
No, great point. And that leads me to another question, folks. You know, we talked about creating value for your customers, but then it's also important to identify who your target customers are, all right? Because without, I think a lot of folks fail to really take the time and effort to really understand and figure out who your target customers are. And without understanding who your target customers are, you don't know who you're creating value for, and you might create for the wrong customers a value which might not be relevant to the others. So it's important to understand who your target customers are, and especially for somebody who's an entrepreneur or an innovator or a doctoral candidate in a university, it's too early for them at times. So I'm just curious to hear your thoughts about how did you all approach it who are already in the startup mode, and anything, from other folks like Jeff, JJ, and Graeme, what is your thoughts around how do you really look at, a target market or a target customer? So, I'm going to start off, JJ, I'm going to start off with you because you come up with a different background, and just help me get started out in terms of what do you think an entrepreneur or an innovator should start to look into a target market or a target customer?
I kick this off in the sense of maybe kind of dodging the question a little bit. I would say this is one of the core questions to answer in the early days when you're starting your own business. And there's an element, particularly for maybe folks on the call, if they're thinking about going to something that's kind of, again, material science, life sciences related, that can actually sometimes be a harder set of questions to answer than for, I don't know, you're creating a competitor to Facebook or something like that.
Yeah.
But this is a core question. And I would say it's one that actually, the best entrepreneurs nail, and they can fully articulate, this is who I'm selling to. And the key part of this is, think of it as like, you'll hear words like value prop or use case, but think of it as like, and here's how they use it. And here's why it is valuable to them. And again, that may all sound super easy. I would tell you with folks doing material science type stuff, sometimes hardware stuff, actually also enterprise tech folks sometimes struggle with this too. Entrepreneurs can often really struggle with this question, answering this question for investors. And I would tell you, for us, if you can't answer that, like articulate that to us in the first 5 to 10 minutes, you've lost our interest entirely. And actually the entire discussion is just going to be about us asking really dumb questions, trying to get at that, so I'll get into a routine sometimes, folks, where I'm like, just walk me through like literally how someone uses it, because I'm trying to then synthesize back to the entrepreneur. Okay, it sounds like they're using it for this thing, like this, they're using it here, and they get the value because it reduces costs, and yeah, that's right. So anyhow, you all can do that thinking ahead of the investor asking you, or get advice from people. This is a key thing. I'll start it off with that. I don't know if I said anything particularly insightful.
No, I think this is a struggle, JJ, and now I think it's a bigger struggle for people who are innovators and actually working in a university, and it's a big struggle even for the big strategics. They struggle on identifying their target customer and their target market, and without doing the due diligence around it, you can really spin wheels and waste money. An extremely important area to focus on.
Yeah.
And Graeme, I'm going to come to you next.
It's a really interesting area, and JJ touched on it, which is, by the way, your target customer, your target market changes every meeting you're in, because actually who you're trying to convince of what changes every time you go into a meeting. So it's all good with, my target market is this sector, and my target customer is this company, and yeah, okay, that's a little bit trite, and you can do that, but it's not really real, because you don't sell to a company, you sell to a person. And what you then have to get into, and I hate talking sort of Miller-Hyman type language or influencer mapping type stuff, but you have to put in the hard yards of working out who is the decision maker for what is the problem statement that they currently have that I'm trying to solve, what is value that they derive from this thing that I'm therefore going to try and explain to them that I'm going to be the answer to their problem. I mean, a couple of little, taking a leaf out of Jeff's book, a couple of little stories. As a UK manufacturer of a particular material in the UK who was trying to sell clips into the aviation industry, and these clips were for sort of tying cables that run along the sort of ducting behind like the parcel, behind the like luggage locker type thing. And he was trying to sell to Airbus and Boeing about lightweighting, and he was trying to talk about this particular plastic being more flame resistant than other materials, and it turns out that he started selling really well, but for none of those reasons, and he couldn't work out why, until he got to go on a factory tour, and he understood that his clips were such that a single person could go click and put it in place, whereas the previous clips required 2 people and a machine to weld something in place. So in fact, he took out a person per unit job all day on the production line, as well as taking away a safety issue they had in the factory of this heat welding system next to things that were flammable, none of which he knew, because he hadn't put in enough of the hard yards to really understand his customer and what problem he was solving for them, if you see what I mean. So I guess what I'm trying to say is there isn't a shortcut. You have to think through every meeting you're in, putting yourself in the shoes on the other side of the people at the table, thinking, what's the problem they need to solve, and who is their decision maker I have to convince. Different situation. I spent 3 years of my life commuting between Guatemala and the Philippines because I developed a water purification product that's now giving away as a thing called the Children's Safe Drinking Water Foundation. And we were trying to sell it to people in sub-Saharan Africa. And I did all the consumer groups and all the trials. And was it ease of use that was the issue? Was it taste of the water that was the issue? What was the issue? And price, was it really price the issue? Because I priced it less than the cost of an egg, which I felt was a sensible price for 10 litres of safe drinking water that day. And then the insight that I gathered was, I was comparing to the wrong competitive set. Because that lady today boiled water. That was how she purified it, rather than this treatment. And I knew that, and I had done the calculation that said the cost of gas per month was $50. The cost of my chemical treatments per month was less than $1. So surely she should take my product, right? Only to discover she didn't want my product at all, because the thing that I missed was the $1 for my product came from her discretionary budget spend for the household. The $50 came from, and I'm sorry for sounding sexist here, but this is the way it was explained to me. The $50 came from her husband's wallet because he paid for all major household expenditures. So she was not incentivized at all to buy this product because someone else was paying for the solution today. And getting to those insights is quite hard, but once you get it, run with it. And that's how you'll find who your real target is, who your real consumer is, and therefore what value to them looks like. I think that was your core question, Yati.
No, and Graeme, I think great points. And I think it's also important to understand it's a target customer, target market, and also to some extent a target geography, because things can change from US versus UK versus China versus India and so on. And the other thing would be, is it a B2B or a B2C? Again, the thought processes are very different in terms of how you approach a target customer or a market. Santiago, I'm sure you're going through some of these thought processes in your journey, in your startup. Any insights, any thoughts you have gained you want to share?
Yes, I think that is something that has already been covered by the panel, but it's also something that the National Science Foundation program makes a lot of emphasis on, is just go out and talk with people. It may sound like talking with 100 people is really annoying, and it really is, because it's like, okay, let's go and find interviews, but going through that process of identifying who do you want to talk with and just talking with them, it really helps you to prove that those hypotheses, go through that process of getting more information and then developing your product around more information that is useful for your final customer. So yes, it's a tough process. It requires a lot of effort, but that will save you a lot of money down the road if you do it well.
And to that point, Santiago, I think, especially if you're into a B2B environment, I think for the B2C environment too, but more to do with B2B, if any innovator is looking into a specific industry or a market, it's extremely important to understand the value chain, because there are different players in the value chain before your product goes to an end market or an end customer. And it's important to understand and interview, like you pointed out, people in the value chain so that you can identify which part of the value chain you bring in more value from your technology or product. So Jeff, to you now, see if you have any insights to add to it.
What I would add is that it really, as you're doing that thinking about the value chain and doing your thinking about the buying process, those are two related but different things. You've got to write it down. You got to map it. You got to draw a little diagram of it. And that sounds like it is a little too precise. It's not, because it forces a discipline of inquiry so that you then go ask the open questions that are staring you in the face in your map. And then as you answer those questions, then you're able to actually get to the core buyer. So again, I have a little story. This is a very large company that sells roofing materials, and they had a superior roofing material. And boy, wouldn't you think architects would want to know that? Yeah, they want to know it, but they weren't buying it. So that was a strikeout. Wouldn't you think building managers would want to know about that? Yeah, they wanted to know about it, but they weren't going to buy it either. And there's reasons why all those people weren't going to buy it. Well, certainly the roofing companies, the companies that actually put the roofing material on top of the commercial building, they want to know about this and they'll buy it, won't they? No, it's not in their best interest. So you know who really cares about that building material and will actually make that buying decision? The CFO or the financial side of the organization. So you've got a superior building material that you're selling to the financial organization. And that's the kind of thing you uncover when you map these things out.
Great points, Jeff. Franchessa, quickly closing the loop with you. Anything, a lot of the discuss. Anything else you would like to add?
Yeah. So there are a lot of resources, especially at all these different universities. Everybody's got, whether it's I-Core or Innovation to Invoice, they've got some sort of business model canvas type situation where you, to me as a scientist, I think analytically, and you basically map out your assumptions, okay, your hypotheses, and create experiments where you go and test them by talking to people. I mean, these are experiments. These are just, that's the way I always thought of them is, you have a hypothesis that, this is the right market. Well, then you go out there and you test it, or this is the person that's going to sign the, going to sign the invoice for you, or that you're selling to. Go out there and test that assumption. And with that data, you learn so much more about your target market and about your product. And, you were able to really map out your industry and learn a lot about where you need to be focusing.
No, great points, Franchessa. You know what? I think we're almost coming to a point where I want to open the panel for questions from the audience. But I quickly want to run one question because of the kind of panel we have. Just quickly, maybe one quick feedback from you all. Just curious, when is the right time in the entrepreneurship journey? Is the right time to pitch to an investor or a VC? And I'm going to start off with JJ, and we can quickly run through one or two, maximum 1 or 2 points.
I'll give you 2 points then. On day one, but my point 2 is separate 2 questions though. When is the right time to talk to an investor from when is the right time to raise funding? You should talk to investors from day one. You should raise funding when you need it.
Great, thank you. Graeme, any feedback from you on that?
I buy JJ's point completely. When to talk to them, often and regularly and openly, because it's Franchessa's point, which I thought was super powerful, and I really liked it, which is imagine each of those as an experiment. They are verbal experiments. You're bouncing an idea off of someone, and pulse probe type spectroscopy. I'm probing you, and you respond, and I need to interrogate your response and work out you liked it, you didn't like it, what did you like, what all of that is useful information that's helping you refine whatever it is you're doing. My one caveat is there is a risk there that you can pee the investors off, right? So it's kind of, how do I do that in a safe learning environment and make sure it's not one of these super critical pitches where I only get one shot at the deal? That's subtly different. But with a learning mindset, talk regularly, talk often, and listen heartily.
Great point. Santiago, from your journey of reaching out to investors, any quick thoughts?
Yes, I think that engaging them as early as possible is pretty good. And also try to engage them through the right avenues. The investors get so many inquiries, so many contact emails, that maybe try to find some place where the investors are actually looking and try to make a compelling case of why your company is a good company to look at. And then the investors are the ones that are going to be looking at, okay, this is the pool of companies that are of our interest, the companies that with the technologies that we're actually looking for, and they will find you in that place, and then you can get a conversation that is a little bit more constructive rather than a one-time thing that is hard to come across very open and very sincere about whatever you're presenting.
Great. Jeff, anything from you?
Just briefly, that the outcome of a funding, of talking to somebody about funding could be funding. But there are other outcomes that are very valuable that you should be thinking about when you go into that.
Great point, Jeff. Thanks. Franchessa, with your experiences in your journey.
Yeah, so I would say just compounding on what JJ said, yeah, get those, get a relationship with some investors, have them on your advisory board. Even before I had an advisory board, I had an investor involved just to bounce business ideas off of because I didn't have any business experience. And then so for a more specific answer on when is it time to raise capital, I would say about 12 months before you need it. So there's also that.
Great point, Franchessa. So again, thank you very much, panel, for your feedback on these questions. Before I go to the Q&A, I just want to share one quick thing about Desca. Folks in the audience or anybody else you want to share this information with, if you want to understand, what is the ecosystem in this tri-county, in the state of Delaware, you can leverage as an innovator, or you also want to go through, like Franchessa mentioned, innovation to invoice or tech to market, where you're trying to understand how do I really take it from a bench scale to the market? What are the key marketing thoughts which we need to dial into process when we are going from a bench scale to the market? So innovation to invoice, anything of that sort. Desca can be your source for that contact, for that information. So feel free to reach out to Desca. It's me, it's Dora, it's Erica, anybody. So feel free to do that. So I'm going to quickly move to some of the questions. So I'm clicking on the Q&A portion of it, Joanna. I'm going to just go through these questions. So the first question is from Katrina, and this is to the panel, all right? So just let me know who wants to answer this question. What is the best way to prepare for an entrepreneurial career right out of academia, PhD training? Is there some sort of recommended postdoc equivalent?
No, just do it. It's the generic Nike thing. You just have to go do it. There's no training. People ask this question to me a lot. What should I do? The classes I should take in college? And nope, you just go do it. Part of the entire gig of entrepreneurship is figuring out how to do it yourself and seeing if you're capable of doing that. So there really is no training that's going to prepare you for it. So you just go do it.
Franchessa, you came from a PhD program into entrepreneurship. Any thoughts around that?
So I went to my, we have an entrepreneur, we have at University of Alabama, an entrepreneur department. So just about every campus has some sort of entrepreneurial development center or something like that. At University of Delaware, it's the Horn Center, and just show up, and they will love to welcome you with open arms and, give you at least some starting points, with what you should learn. Some colleges have entrepreneur classes, but I have known a few of the teachers of those, and they've never been entrepreneurs in some cases. So I don't know how great that is, but I would definitely start at your college at the Entrepreneur Center, and depending on where your idea is from, if it's personal or if it's something related to your graduate research, there are different paths that you can take depending on which way you're going to go.
One comment I'll just make on that is part of the reason I'm saying that too, though, is regardless of your background, I would tell you almost every entrepreneurial story, if you really push them, starts with something like the following. First thing that was mysterious to me was how do you even start a company? So I had to Google starting a company, and then I had to learn about so there's a lot of times when people ask the question, how do I prepare? They're kind of asking a little bit of give me the dummies guide. And as I said, part of this is you actually do just have to figure it out. It's not like you have to become an expert on incorporation law and stuff, but that's part of the experience of being the entrepreneur. You're now the owner of this business. And yeah, there's a ton of resources out there to teach you how, but then you got to go through it. You'll have some weird, I sent it to Delaware Corporate Services. They didn't get back to me. It turned out it got lost. We had actually been running for 2 weeks and hiring people. We didn't have an answer. You're just going to figure it out. No one's going to tell you what that looks like. And you're going to figure it out. And it's going to be part of what you do. And ultimately become the most annoying part of your job. But all that stuff, it builds. That's like day one. That's the least important. But you just figure it out. There's tons of playbooks out there, but ultimately you just have to go do it.
Good, Graeme.
I forget just quite what the audience is that's joined here, because I think it can go down to undergrad, et cetera, et cetera. And I would echo JJ's point, which is just go do it. But you know what? Earlier on in life, you were given opportunities to try stuff that you weren't entirely sure why you were trying it. And I'm not talking about classes. I'm talking about charity fundraising activities. I'm talking about organizing the ball for in your dorm room. I'm talking about crazy fundraising ideas that when you're a student. These are great learning moments because there was no risk in them at all, but you learned about interacting with people, you learned about making a persuasive pitch, you learned about selling your ideas to others, you learned about getting people to buy into the direction you're trying to go in. You know what? If you find yourself doing that kind of stuff when, as you go through school and high school and college, that's an indicator that maybe you've got the gumption inside you to go do it in real life too. That's great. If I'm talking to people, because I can't see you all who are significantly younger than me, who are still at that phase of life, you know what? Grab those opportunities and use them as learning moments or teaching moments to get yourself ready for this future life that JJ and Franchessa have been talking about.
And feel free to reach out to Deska.
One thing that I would like to add is that you don't need to do it yourself. You don't need to start a company by yourself, and you don't need to just get something off the ground. You can definitely go and join someone, an entrepreneur that is looking for people. As an entrepreneur, you always need help, and there's always more help that you can use. So just go find an entrepreneur that needs help, and then just go and start working with them. You'll learn by doing, and then you will have the whole experience of like really guided experience by applying whatever you need to learn. And with regards a specific funding or specific routes that you can do, their university, for example, the University of Delaware, has a Blueprint Proof of Concept program in which you get some funding to prove an idea, and then that can be considered somewhat like a postdoc, where you're working your idea, you're working your business while being paid and while being sustained during that time. So there's definitely ways that you can do it. You can either do it by joining, or you can do it by using the resources that are already in the universities.
No, great points, folks. Again, as a follow-up question by Katrina, I think maybe Santiago and Franchessa for sure, we'll start off with you on that. It says, what do you look for a new team member or colleague and collaborators? So what do you look for in a new team member or a collaborator?
I would say don't duplicate yourself. That's the biggest piece of advice I have. People tend to gravitate towards others that are similar, to them in background or whatever. But, in this case, you need people that complement you and your ideas. You need somebody that does not have the exact same background, and that's going to make you much more competitive from an innovation standpoint as well, because people think different ways. And yeah, I've done that in the past, and it's worked out extremely well.
I would like to look for someone that is open for feedback. You definitely will have to have good conversations, and you need to do that yourself. You need to be open to get feedback from your teammates. So that's something that is very important to look for. And then another thing that I think is important is embracing the uncertainty. Someone that is able to just go and jump in something that has uncharted waters and be okay and thrive in that kind of environment.
Can I add one thing to this, which is just observing folks across, I think about our own company right now. One thing I tell you, I realized is a very general rule of life is when companies get big, the ultimate culture that gets set, if you were to express it with like adjectives, they would basically apply to the founder or founding team. So ultimately the values that the founders have up front tend to be expressed in the company. I would almost go as far as say it's a universal rule, which is why like our president matters so much and a bunch of other stuff, right? Like stuff does come down from leadership, whether you like it or not. You can like the actions, but the values come down. So one thing I would say is don't spend too much time thinking about this. Some entrepreneurs get really spun around the axle. They're like team of three and they're talking about building culture. You've got a team of three, like just hire people. But I'll give the very practical implication of this, which is, and this for some reason feels controversial in the current moment, but you need to fire people extremely quickly as an early stage company. Do it well, do it correctly, be a nice human being. But the minute you see an issue, figure out you got a 1-strike policy, fire them. That's it. It's when you're a small company and you're hiring the first few people, remember if you got 3 people, each person is a third of the company. And so if a third of the company isn't performing or is toxic, it ruins the entire thing. It spoils the entire bunch. So just be thinking about it. So actually, the best way to manage culture is more so, it's hard to kind of say, here's where I think we're going to land. That's a tough thing, I think, for most people to do. But more so when you see something that doesn't fit, like that is actually taking you in the wrong direction, slice it out immediately. It is a cancer and it will grow. And the I'd tell you, one of the biggest reasons we see companies fail is I guess you could say it's bad hiring, but I'd say more importantly, it's bad firing. It's the absence of firing people, and it destroys companies. And then that usually, again, gets blamed on bad hiring, but it's actually bad firing. You can make mistakes on hiring. You just have to be able to fire.
I know we have only 1 more minute, so I'm going to go quickly to one more question real quick. This is from Elena. What is the best strategy for finding possible investors? Go ahead, Franchessa.
I would say go to a pitch event. So find, I think there's an angel pitch event in Philadelphia, or go to your entrepreneur center and just ask them where the most frequent pitch events are. There's a Mid-Atlantic Diamond Ventures. That's a pitch event where you find some, and a lot of angel investors. Once you get to the VC area, you start to build a portfolio and a network of those people. So you already kind of have those relationships, and you'll as you grow, you'll start to build those relationships. But yeah, just your initial seed investors, I would go to these angel events and start networking.
Go ahead.
My quick build, if that's okay, is, as Franchessa says, I think there is no shortage of events for you to go to. But do some pre-work before you get there. What exactly is it you're pitching? Really work on crisping up that pitch and that proposal, especially, why you are so investment ready in under 30 seconds, by the way. That's the work you need to do. You will find events, as Franchessa says, there's many people who will guide you to the right events. And then my one thought is, and what is it you're pitching them to for? What is it you want? Because it's not just a bag of money, because they don't always just give you a bag of money. The money comes with consequences. It comes with clauses. It comes with, here's stuff you've got to do with this money. So be really clear on what you want, what you need, and where it's going to get you to, rather than just who am I going to pitch to, if that makes sense. Sorry if that sounds unhelpful.
Great points. And just before closing, Desca also hosts an investor forum locally here. So if you are the right company, you can always reach out to Desca. Any other closing remarks? I know we are just 1 minute past 2:30. Anything else or any closing remarks on the panel?
I would say if anybody's interested in entrepreneurship, reach out to Desca. And, there's a few different entrepreneur forums that take place once a month. And, they're at several different levels. So if you're interested, go talk to some of them.
Thank you very much to the panel here. Really appreciate your feedback, your thoughts. Great discussion.